Hello and welcome to the webinar on data-driven interventions to enrich human capital. In the next hour, we will deep dive into how organizations can meet goals of enriching human capital with a data-driven approach. Throughout this session, in the next hour, please feel free to ask any questions or share any thoughts or comments in the chat window. We will have a dedicated Q&A section towards the end where we will try to answer most of your questions. I would now like to introduce our panel as speakers. Our very first speaker, Dr. Reema Chaudhary. She is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Datamatics, a seasoned HR leader with over 2 decades of experience. She has been instrumental in building tech and leadership capabilities for IBM, Sony Pictures, and QNOX. In her previous roles, she has championed change management in the tech and culture space. She has achieved multiple accolades across in HR, like 50 Most Influential HR Leaders, Young HR Professional of the Year, 2021 Global Women in Leadership Awards, to name a few. Our next speaker, Piyush Mathur, comes with a background of running multiple global businesses, and about 7 years ago, he decided to pivot into HR to unlock human potential. He spent most of his career in general manager roles running different Nielsen businesses globally. With Johnson & Johnson, he led global workforce analytics and talent management. He's now an investor and strategic advisor to a few startups, including FairNow.ai. He has been sharing his learnings as a lecturer at Wharton, Stanford, NYU, and Rutgers. Our third speaker, Dr. Bikramjit Chaudhary, comes with 3 decades of experience across multinationals like Nielsen, KPMG, 7 Dots, ZS Associates, to name a few. An accomplished technocrat, an author and management consultant, he has delivered numerous keynote sessions for global audiences, is a columnist and a thought leader across an impressive range of publications and patents. In his current role as SVP and Global Head of Advanced Analytics and Data Sciences at Datamatics, he closely works with the executive teams to service clients globally. So now, without any further ado, I would like to invite our panelists and our moderator for the webinar. So over to you, Dr. Reema.
Thank you, Tanvi. It's great being here on this forum today. And I welcome all of you who are here today to attend to an interesting session, which has some stalwarts in this field, Dr. Bikramjit, Mr. Piyush Mathur. The introductions that Tanvi has mentioned says it all. So I start by saying, in God we trust. Rest all come with data. So that's been there. The statement has been there for some time. But let me mention something first. So has anyone seen this movie called Moneyball, starring Brad Pitt? So for people who haven't, let me mention why I mentioned this. So this movie talks about how a manager has been able to kind of revive and make a winning team out of a supposedly weak team. And what he used was the power and potential of analytics, which is termed as sabermetrics. It's a science in sport. And while I start with this aspect, it's very important for us to note that the power of analytics is all pervasive, be it sports, be it corporate. And in the next 1 hour, we are going to delve a bit into how analytics is helping corporates in various ways. So before we start off, can we put up the first poll question, which might help set the tone of the webinar for us today? Okay, can everyone see the poll question? It says, do you currently use people analytics in your organization? The answers are yes, extensively, yes to some extent, no, but interested in implementing, no, but interested. So host and panelists cannot vote, obviously. So we are waiting for the audience to put in their votes, and probably that will give us some insight into how we start off this webinar today. So we have some responses now, and perhaps people will continue to vote. But where I see maximum response of 54% is in the area of yes to some extent. So which means that people are indeed using people analytics in their organizations to some extent. So this is interesting because we would be very keen to know how we can use analytics extensively to drive decision making. And that's also very important because over a period of time, it has been proven that for CHRO's capability scorecard, analytics and analytics driven decision making is going to be a very, very core factor. So let me understand from Piyush, given his huge experience both in corporate and now in the academic sector as well globally. So Piyush, what do you think are some of the best practices in analytics adoption?
Yeah, Dr. Rima, that was a great start. And Moneyball, like you mentioned, so much of analytics being used. And we see the results here now. First of all, I want to tell you that I am very impressed that there is no participant here that is saying, no, I am not interested in people analytics. That's a really, I was worried about that. I was worried like, oh, if some people say, no, we are not interested, how do you create that interest? But, we live in a data world. I mean, every time we decide to go on Airbnb and take a Uber to the airport or, just every time we are buying something on Amazon, it's so data driven. That's the world we live in. And employees expect their companies to be more data driven. And, the gut will always remain relevant. It will be always important to use your gut, but, be more data-based and evidence-based in the decision-making about people's career. I think that is now an expectation from employees. So, if you look at the other three levels, so glad that there is nobody not interested, but you look at the other three levels, you had 34% of people saying, I'm not using it, but I am interested to. And I want to start with some of the practices there because that's the simplest way you can actually start doing analytics. So imagine if you knew the gender of your organization. You know how many males, females, and you have Microsoft Excel. If you have those two things, which I think every organization, no matter how small, you would have, you can actually start with some analytics. And that's really the starting point because you can start putting gender ratios by levels, by pay grade, and then start seeing if you have enough women in leadership. And how does the gender ratio change? I did this simple analytics when I was at Nielsen. It actually told us where the breaking point was, where the ratios actually turned. At the entry level, we actually had more women than men in Nielsen. But then as we went up to certain bands, it started to change. And when you knew exactly where that breaking point was, you could do targeted interventions to really enable women to grow. And, I remember doing personal interviews and really understanding what the reason was and then addressing them. And then in a year, we saw really good progress. So simple thing like that, I think is something that can be done. Let's go to the 54% of people who are saying yes, to some extent, I actually do analytics. Most of the analytics that I've seen are mostly descriptive analytics, which means you're looking at, gender ratios, who left the company, you're looking at profiles of people who are leaving versus staying. You're also probably looking at the skills of your employees. So it's great that you're doing it to some extent. Start to think about predictive analytics. So can you predict who is going to leave the company before that event actually happens? Imagine if the HR function knew people that were going to leave the company, you can make those interventions and prevent that event from happening. This is something I did both at J&J and at Nielsen, where we were able to predict and then take actions and then prevent those events from happening, and hence making a business impact. In Nielsen, it's a talked about study. It's on LinkedIn. It's also in this book called The Power of People. It's, we made a $16 million impact because we were able to restrict and knew who was going to leave and then prevent them from leaving and taking those targeted actions. And then let me go to the last one, which is yes, extensively. So you're probably already doing predictive analytics. You're already making a lot of difference. There, Dr. Rima, the best practice that I have seen, which is really the North Star, is using your skills-based compensation. So skills is the new currency. Every organization needs to know what skills will be required in the future. Every business model of every organization is changing. And I often say that if the business model of your organization is not changing, then you should think about changing your organization. So imagine with the business model changing, you'll require new skills in the future. And having an understanding of what those critical skills are, and then in a prescriptive manner with AI telling you what is the best compensation for those critical skills, because you are now able to measure it versus the market, and you are able to see those critical employees within the company. You are making compensation-based decisions based on those skills. There are a couple of companies that I know that are doing it and have been doing it for 4 or 5 years now, and they've been really, really successful in doing that. So there, the best way I can answer this best practice question is wherever you are in those 4 levels, try to go to the next level. And even if you're on the topmost level, there is so much more scope to do more of prescriptive analytics. That's what I would say, Dr. Rima.
Great. So on the same thing, of course, Dr. Vikramjit will be very keen to hear your views as well.
Sure, Dr. Rima, and I completely concur with what you just mentioned. So it boils down to the adoption, essentially boils down to 3 sets: mindset, skill set, and tool set. How an organization embraces this, right? So mindset is all about having a data-driven culture, and that really drives the proceedings in the organization. Now the question is, does mindset come first, or does it have to be influenced in terms of changing the behavior? So in many organizations with whom we have sort of worked as consultants, what we have seen is that sometimes what's the cart versus the horse, that order relationship has to be sometimes redefined, which essentially means that you have some quick wins, and to the impact, to the leadership, to the executives, and then there are better buy-ins, which influences the mindset, which leads to further investment on skill set and tool set, right? Certain organizations, as Piyush mentioned, they're already up in the maturity curve. So over there, the mindset is already there. There is the top leadership is promoting data-driven culture, data-driven decision-making. So over there, most of them will be on that top bracket, using extensively or having the interest and the inclination to use something like people analytics extensively. So essentially, if you look into the adoption piece, you can think about it more as a sort of a pyramid, where the first level, the top of the pyramid, are the executives, right? Their buy-in, their complete involvement in data-driven decision-making, which involves people data, but the data is for people, but the inferences and conclusions are all business outcome. Then obviously comes the next level, which is about the HR function. How the HR matrix and KPIs, those matrix, the little moves based on the adoption. Third level of the management, because it's not good enough to be restricted only to the executives. The fourth level are essentially the line managers, so the first-time managers, because you want to percolate and trickle it down to the grassroots level more and more. And the fifth level, the bottom of the pyramid, are the employees themselves. They want to participate, they want to contribute, they want to use this understanding and knowledge in order to evolve their career progression, be far more participative in terms of data-driven decision-making, so that they are being able to propel their career with the help and assistance of their managers and right? So, and again, the maturity of the organization where it is leads to the trickling effect. But at an overall level, these three sets, as I mentioned, the skill set, the tool set, and the mindset, typically will be the enablers for adoption. And people analytics in general, it's still in a sort of evolving state. We call it people analytics, we call it calendar analytics, we call it workforce analytics, we call it HR analytics in different ways. It's still evolving. It is still getting into a more, the impact of people analytics is getting more and more felt with events like COVID that happened, right? A pandemic which sort of changed the entire landscape. So, and then post that, the great resignation, and now the great comeback to the office, right? Those sinusoidal curves. The people analytics, as the program has to run perennially throughout. It is not a function of the time where you're in a crisis that you will need to really have data-driven interventions or data-driven decision-making. A program which really prepares you for the crisis are the most effective ones. So most of the organizations which are up in the maturity curve and have adopted and embraced people analytics very effectively, they use this period when the crisis is not there to gear up for the time when the crisis is there. And I think there are lots of learning that organizations were at a more nascent stage to how they should evolve, because they don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are lots of best practices that are there and lots of practices to emulate. And what is most encouraging is what Piyush sort of mentioned as part of the core result, that there is an inherent interest to embrace people analytics. There is essentially everybody is at least having the inclination and the interest to embrace it in some form and some shape. Might be the start has to be generally will be small. There has to be some quick wins, and then it can propel to the next level and go up the ladder. So that's required. That's required the thought.
Sure. I think this aspect of mindset is really very critical, because there has been a time when we used to be very MIS focused. MIS used to be the end all and be all, and from there to move up the value chain to start talking about analytics, it's taken quite a bit of journey. And like Dr. Vikramjit mentioned, it's still an evolution that is happening. But there are also these examples in organizations like Piyush mentioned, where we look at data and we are in a position to kind of understand what's going on in the organization. For example, the power of diversity, that example that he gave. So obviously the start point or the trigger of that was the analysis that came out of the demographics, right? So this is a point which is kind of, tempting me to talk about the analytic value chain. So what we have in this value chain and how it progressively moves up. So it starts with opinion, which is of course gut feel based on experience. I just know, but actually without data, you're just a person with an opinion. That's it. So then we come to data, which is structured, but raw, not easily digestible always. And hence we moved on to metrics, which is all about ratios and counts and trendable. But the problem with metrics is over a period of time, audience tends to get dumb. Then we get into analysis where we identify the relationships, the trends, or we look at special populations. Then comes insight, which leads to action and influences decision makers. And finally, the action part, where a process changes or a policy changes or new programs start off, which kind of take organizations to a different level of effectiveness altogether. And obviously, when we talk about effectiveness, there is one aspect which always comes in, and that's the aspect of return on investment. So, what do we gain from these initiatives? What does the ROI look like? Is there at all an ROI? When can we kind of send some ROI within what period of time? And how do we measure the ROI? So these are all related questions which comes in. So Piyush, would you like to throw some light on that area? ROI in people analytics initiatives?
Absolutely. No, and you very well said how you start with metrics and then you go to insights and then you do actions. And Dr. Rima, I used to say this before, like insight without action is overhead. But then I realized over the last few years, running people analytics, that is not just about actions that you take from the insights that came. You have to also go back and measure the outcomes that came out of those actions. So like you were saying, these actions that were done, new policy formed, different things that can be done. And then go back and say, we did these actions. What came back to us as outcome of those actions? And that's why I kind of rephrased, and I always talk about insight without outcome is overhead. So you can't just stop at action. You've got to go back and then measure the outcomes of those actions. And if you are able to measure those outcomes, then you can get to return on investment. Because now you can start linking it back to what the cost used to look like and what the cost is after we achieve those outcomes. And that's all you need in a return on investment. On the side that's telling you these are the outcomes and this is how it's become versus what it used to be. And that's the impact. So the example I was giving from Nielsen, where we were able to take actions and then see our attrition drop among those people where we took actions, that got translated into $16 million a year. And that was tangible recruiting cost, but it was also intangibles, like people, when there is a churn, new people that they are coming into the organization have to get the organizational knowledge, and it takes a few months before they are really up and running like the incumbent who left. So that churn has cost attached to it. And we work with the finance team to be able to figure out what that cost is, and then come back and say the return on this investment that we did, and it was, I would say less than $1 million, where we did those investments. And these were things like having career conversations with your employees who are at the risk of leaving the company, making sure that the career path is clear, making sure that they have development programs in place for what their aspirations are. Many times we found that they wanted to move away from this team and get exposed to a new learning with another team. So just lateral moves, not even promotions, just lateral moves was actually driving a lot of retention. But we didn't know that. We didn't have that insight. We got that insight once we looked at the data, built that model, and then applied to people who were currently in their roles for many years, and decided that some, of course, are ready for promotion, so they should be promoted. But some could be just laterally moved to other teams, other functions, other businesses. And that made a huge, dent in our attrition, brought it down, which then translated into $16 million. A similar thing, we did in Johnson & Johnson, where health and wellness of our employees is paramount, where we wanted to be the healthiest healthcare company in the world if we are the largest healthcare company in the world. So, it started like 40 years ago. The CEO at that time said, we want our employees to be the healthiest on the planet. So there were lots of interventions that were done. We were spending millions of dollars. They actually went and bought a company called Human Performance Institute so that it's focused on our employees to really build their performance from all perspectives. And then we started to look at, we spent all this millions of dollars. What is happening to our healthcare costs? And are our employees healthy? So we were able to see a control panel versus people who had actually gone through the programs and then compare them. And again, those were matched panels. So it's not like these guys are more high performing and these guys were not. It was a matched panel. And we were able to compare the results by going through the program. And we also knew what the investment was in terms of dollars. And similar to marketing, which I'm sure some of you are aware of, marketing mix modeling, where every time you spend some money on marketing, you want to know how much sale went up and what dollars you got back. We were able to do this in the healthcare costs. And we found that for every dollar we were spending, we were getting $6 back. And when we were doing this exercise, there were a list of healthcare programs, right? It was not just one. We were able to then say, among this list of programs, these are the ones that are really high ROI. These are the ones that are really not great ROI. So we went back to the drawing board to start rethinking some of those programs, whether we should continue, if we have to substitute it with some other program, what that program will look like. So it led to so many insights, just this exercise of return on investment. One final thing I would say on this is HR needs to catch up. I've seen this in marketing when, I was general manager, Nielsen, running a large business, doing that marketing mix modeling for clients. Finance does a pretty good job. For every dollar they spend, they kind of go back and say, okay, what happened? We made this investment. I think HR has to pick up the game. And the data is now there. Data is there. So it's really for us to build our skills, learn from marketing, learn from finance, and raise the bar within the HR function. With that, I'll hand it back to you, Dr. Reema.
Sure. But I think you touched upon a very important point that top performing companies, they don't just invest in the infrastructure needed to perform analysis at a high level. They actually drill down the metrics to a much deeper level and communicate it to the decision makers, and they basically tie it to the business outcome. And the moment it's tied to the business outcome, you have kind of achieved your goal. So that was very interesting to note. And I know Dr. Bikramjit also has, similar things to talk about. So one thing, of course, what we have done in Datamatics internally about how we use analytics from our climate survey exercise and how we see the ups and downs and take corrective actions basis the scores on employee pride, satisfaction, different other critical and even hygiene areas. But I know that Dr. Bikramjit has worked on a vast area comprising, of course, the climate survey part, but there's been much more. So we would like to hear from you about those areas. Same question for you, please.
Yeah. So in some way, Dr. Reema, you'll see that the first question on adoption and the next one on ROI. So ROI actually, to a large extent, also drives your adoption, right? Faster adoption, quicker adoption, company-wise adoption, deeper adoption, and all that. So return on investment is absolutely critical. Piyush was talking about test control, right? Design of experiments. A/B testing, what's technically can be we can give it the sort of a description of an A/B testing. Now, this can be at an aggregated level. This can be at a very granular individual level. You identify an individual who needs training, right? you have the intervention with training, specific skill set training or soft skill, hard skill, etc. You measure pre and post. You measure the productivity. You measure the performance of that individual. So you're being able to measure the return on investment of the training. So it can be as granular as that individual level. And that's what really enriches an employee experience. Now, of course, there can be an aggregation at any level, right? So we talked about attrition. So it's a documented fact that for every single individual who leaves on an average, there's a 33% cost that gets associated with the replacement, right? Initially, because of the hiring, the training, the adaptation to the environment and all that. It's a huge concern. So if you are being able to reduce attrition by a few percentage points, the impact is phenomenal. And there, not only these metrics are available, measurement instruments are currently in play so that one can measure, and when one can measure, one can improve. Similarly for hiring, similarly for engagement. Dr. Rima, you talked about our climate survey within Datamatics, and similarly other interventions that we have with our customers. So engagement measurement, which used to be a little bit of a sort of a mystical thing at one point of time. Nowadays, there are lots of ways one can actually measure engagement, either directly or through proxy. And we actually carved out an entire journey from satisfaction to engagement to eventual what we call as inspiration, right? That journey can be carved out when you are being able to track, measure, and then have the appropriate interventions to have a significant impact at granular level and at an aggregated level. The why both are important because granular level interventions enrich and really motivate the employees who are the main stakeholders. But at the end of the day, people analytics, if we look at it pragmatically, it is all about business outcomes. And it's about business outcomes, and the business outcomes motivate more investment, more adoption, and more deployment of people analytics. So, yes, ROI is no more in abstraction. It is no more something that is aspirational. It is in play, and it is something that can be measured and fine-tuned and calibrated and can be made contextual and then can be honed further to have further improvement on this sorts of thing.
Right.
I'll make that.
Yeah. Sorry, please go ahead.
Just a quick comment. You mentioned, climate survey and how you used Dr. Rima to manage the workforce. And Vikramji talked about how we were in the pandemic and how we had to do analytics. So I just wanted to quickly mention how we managed it at Johnson & Johnson. It was such a difficult time, right, for everybody. We didn't have a playbook. We didn't know what employees were thinking. And traditionally, we did this annual survey. We did surveys in the middle, depending on what topics were. But during pandemic, I worked with the CHRO and the CEO to decide how we are going to get the sentiment of employees on a much more frequent basis. So every week we went out to 3,000 employees, got the results, presented it in like 2 days to the executive committee, and the actions happened by Friday. So, by Tuesday we were presenting results, and then by Friday the actions would happen. We did this for almost 2 years. What we were trying to assess kind of changed because the environment kept changing. Initially it started by how are you doing? How, what struggles are you going through? Then it evolved into race inequity issues as George Floyd happened in the US. And then, as we started to see pandemic come down a little bit, discussions about return to work workplace started to happen. So the what we were evaluating kind of kept changing and kept evolving, but every week we were looking at it and taking decisions. Towards the end of it, in almost 2 years, our CEO came out in investor call, and he talked about the engagement survey. We called it the sentiment, employee sentiment. And he said he was able to manage during the pandemic. We have 140,000 employees. During the pandemic, we were able to manage, or he was able to manage the workforce because of the sentiment survey and what they were telling us and how we were reacting and taking decisions very quickly. Never happened in the past, but very quickly addressing it. So it's so important. And, none of us wishes that there is any other pandemic. We'll have a playbook, but, it was important to develop one during that time.
Yeah. And while talking about the ROI piece, the one thought that was coming to my mind that organizations really need to prioritize their investments and focus on the areas where analytics can drive maximum benefits. I think, Piyush, today you have shared so many examples of where it has been beneficial for the business and actual returns have been very much visible. It's just that belief certainly has to be there. CHROs maybe need to lead that journey of belief, ably supported by the businesses who need to show that openness towards getting into this area. But once you get into this area, I think, there's huge potential for analytics to help in the business overall.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, Dr. Emma, you raised a really critical point, because prioritization becomes a problem in people analytics. Initially, it's like, oh, the stakeholders don't want it, not interested. But when they start getting interested, you don't have the resource to do so much, and then you got to prioritize. So how do you prioritize? I'll tell you a simple thing we used to do was two by two matrix, the traditional consulting matrix. On one axis is value. What value are we going to get from this analytics? And the other axis was effort. How much effort is it going to take? So if it's high value, low effort, you'll jump into it. Yeah. But if it's low value and high effort, you'll think twice and go back to the stakeholder and say, this is the reason we'd like to prioritize and not do this at this moment.
Sure. I think it's now, all the threads are so interesting and we have so much to contribute, but we also want to move to the next leg of the discussion. I think now let's take a short break to get into the next poll question. Can we have the next poll question, Tanvi? Okay, so it must be visible on screen. I'll still read it out. What's the biggest challenge you face in implementing people analytics? The choices are data collection and management, understanding and interpreting data, gaining buy-in from stakeholders, and lack of skilled personnel. Which out of these you think is the biggest challenge?
While the results are coming in, Piyush, in your view, what's the biggest challenge?
Yeah, I don't want to bias any opinion while the survey is on, but there it goes. So, yeah, I was going to say data collection, but it's divided between data collection and understanding.
Yeah, but I think it's a very honest reflection of what exactly the situation is in the industry. Because understanding and interpreting data, that is indeed a gap. A very simple thing. If you look at how the job portals used to look like 10 years back, did we ever see positions for very rare, right? Data analysts and, chief data architect and these kinds of things, basically hardcore analytics professionals' jobs used to be far and few, right? How the situation has changed now, because companies now know that there have to be established individuals with proven credentials who can add value to this. And this does require investment. This does require prioritization. So I think it's quite clear what and the situation is. But Piyush, what do you think could be a way out? How can organizations get out of this particular scenario and try to take the benefit of analytics?
Yeah, and we can focus on the two big ones that people mentioned. One was the data. As I got into HR and I was coming, from running a business which is data analytics business into HR, I had assumed that all the data will be in place and everything will be clean. And we used to manage millions and billions of data points for our clients and our customers, but that was not the case. And I remember saying at that time, Dr. Rima, that, there are two kinds of data, bad data and very bad data. And if you have if you have converted very bad data into bad data, then you've not done a bad job. So I think it is just kind of says it all in terms of, yes, you will have data that is not clean. And by the way, it is a journey. You cannot at any point in time stand up and say my data is 100% clean. Just keep evolving and keep cleaning that data. New data sources will come that will be not clean. So start cleaning them, integrating them. I think the biggest task in HR will be to have clean and connected data. I have seen, data coming from a HRIS system, a data coming from a recruiting system, data coming from a talent management system, and they are not connected. So if you connect them, you unlock the power of that data. And of course, it has to be clean as well. So that would be on the data point. Understanding and interpreting data, I think, is a skill that can easily be built. I have seen that skill not being to the level required within the HR function, but it's something that we can really focus on and build. So I think just getting an expert who kind of then starts training all the HR function is a good way out to start with. Or even within your HR function, if you find somebody who's very good analytically and data-wise, making that person maybe added responsibility or giving them a dedicated role in people analytics is a really good start, because then they can start looking at all the other HR leaders and their teams and start making them interpret the data in the right way. Yeah, I mean, those were the two big ones. Buy-in from stakeholders is also very important. I think it's, I used to always say that finding the solution is less important than making the business leader realize what the problem is. Many times we are actually going after the wrong problem. We should really define what problem are we trying to solve and go a couple of levels deeper in understanding the problem before trying to run for the solution. So once we do that, you will get a better buy-in from the stakeholders, because now they'll really understand what the problem is and the business impact of that problem. And then you can run after the solution. So I think that those are like important points to look at.
Sure. And Piyush, you're kind of reminding me of our industrial psychology statement that self-awareness is the biggest of them all. Once you're aware where the issue lies, you can take all kinds of corrective actions. But reaching that stage in itself, the awareness of, what's going on, that becomes the most important step. So talking about the right and wrong of, the adoption piece, let me try to understand from Dr. Bikramjit, where do you think the adoption has gone wrong? Or has it really gone wrong? It's just that we are, in a journey and we have not really reached the desired level yet? How would you define the situation and your prescription?
So some of the typical situations that we have encountered as consultant in different organizations where I won't say completely wrong, but not necessarily have flourished the way it could have. Number one is not necessarily very clear about the business objectives and the business outcomes. What is it that the organization is really trying to accomplish? That's one of the key areas, because many times it has been others are doing it, so I will do it. Or the fear of missing out. If that's the syndrome, that really drives your adoption or initial inclination, then you can't go too far, right? So there has to be a very clear understanding what you are really trying to accomplish by embracing something like people analytics. The business benefits need to be understood. So there are lots of coaching sometimes that are required in order, for example, for the organizations to really understand the value and power of people analytics. So that is still work in progress. As we interact with the different organizations, we see that some of the euphoria is not necessarily business outcome driven, but driven by the fact that others are doing it, so there must be something in it, and let's take it up and try and do something. That's number one. Number two is, in today's world, the success has to be quick for anybody to have a sort of a deep buy-in, especially the executives and the senior leadership. Now, if you curate or architect or conceive a program which will yield you result after 18 months, 24 months, and nothing is actually visible till that time, it's all work in progress. There is utter frustration, there is disbelief, there are detachments, and eventually those programs phase out. So even if there has to be a mid to long term vision and perspective, but they need to be broken down into smaller details where, for example, in the short term, you are being able to see and show some value, and then automatically the resource of programs flourish. Many organizations we have seen haven't really conceived it that way. And the way they conceived it, in order to transform it into these granular breaks where you would be able to show tangible business outcomes, it was not really possible. So there had to be a disruption, and you have to start all over again. And then there were those frustrations or deprioritizations. That's another thing that we have seen. The third is lack of data, as we sort of discussed, or lack of credible or quality data. Now, one of the elements that is very, very crucial, as Piyush was mentioning, we can't really strive for perfect data. There is nothing called perfect, right? And in all types of analytics, we have to deal with data that is imperfect. Now, I have seen organizations actually striving for that perfection in terms of data quality, data maturity, before they would like to embrace something on the lines of people analytics. So that's a complete misconception, and that those things also had to be those myths had to be broken. And the only way you can break those myths is by demonstrating. So sometimes it becomes a little bit of a chicken and egg, which comes first, and hence the programs get stalled, and the momentum gets lost and all that. So these are some of the areas, 3-4 key things. If they are being stitched together properly with proper coaching and all that, I think things will become much more smoother. And stakeholder alignment really comes in when these elements are made really clear. They are the sponsors, they will be essential, their blessings are very much, their endorsements are very much the key. But these elements, once they are really made sort of amply clear how they interplay and how they sort of are intertwined to the success of the organization, especially on the business outcome, then the momentum automatically starts building. And the best way I've seen is when there are lots of mistrust or, not necessarily enough enthusiasm or some past failures really coming in the way of taking up something for the future, is to, for example, run a small proof of concept and then bring in the aspects of some of the other glorious examples in their industry where people analytics have brought in those dividends. So these sorts of combinations can actually help really remove this impediment. And the last point is, not all organizations will have to be like Johnson and Johnson, right? It's huge. It can have its own people analytics team. It can have its own resources. It can it's sort of self-sufficient in many ways. But for other organizations to start and embrace these, they don't need to be all data literate. They all don't need to have many data scientists. There are these popular misconceptions that unless and until we have all the right resources, then we will not be able to kickstart. But there are external helps that are available. And organizations should look for those sorts of help, have the right experts, consultants, etc. coming in, doing the initial groundwork, doing the heavy lifting, passing on the knowledge and training, and then internally a center of excellence, and those knowledge base can get developed, right? So these are some of the things that we have witnessed very, very frequently. And I would say the removal of these are not rocket science. Yes, there is data science, but not rocket science. So as long as these things are taken into consideration, one cannot.
Yeah. I think we can go to the Q&A, Dr. Rima. I would give some homework to the attendees.
Absolutely.
There is one.
We have 6 minutes now. We can devote to the Q&A part.
Yeah,
Yes,
just
what
one
kind of
thing.
questions have come up?
Yeah, one homework I would give to the attendees is go search on the internet for a example of where data has gone wrong and it has affected people analytics. This is Canadian government 2013 using people analytics to understand the job vacancy rate in Canada, and then getting wrong data and making wrong decisions as a country. It's a much publicized case. There are several articles on it. Go out and see what bad data and wrong data can do in terms of decision making.
Interesting. I'll certainly look for it.
It's a very, very popular one.
Yeah. We have 6 minutes. Let's see what kind of question comes up.
There are two questions that two of the attendees have posted, and I just wanted to let the rest of the attendees know that if you want to post your questions, please do that in the Q&A tab. So you can post your questions there. And right now, Dr. Rima, there are two questions. One question reads, how can leaders encourage the use of data in HR decision making throughout the organization?
Okay. So yes, even I do have an answer to that about the encouragement piece, but let me hear from Piyush first.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy one. There are, first is getting the data in front of the HR team so that it's easily accessible. They're able to see it. But then that's one thing. Making them use it is another. So for that, you got to do a lot of things in terms of really getting the HR team to start using that data and becoming more data oriented in their decision making. What we used to do after we had visualized it to the whole HR team, by the way, like more than 2,000 people in HR in J&J, making sure that they are looking at it, they are coming back with how they used it. So we actually started to collect use cases of how they got those insights and how they are driving those outcomes. And then the best use case used to be awarded by the CHRO in a large town hall. So, it's more than the push strategy. I think it's more the pull strategy. where really rewarding and avoiding the HR folks that are really making data-driven decisions and figuring out what are the different ways of doing that.
And I would like to add an example of initiating and inculcating a behavior change. So this is something which I have used in the past also. So I have seen a tendency in human beings to generally talk in terms of collective. So a report comes in. Some people on the floor are not happy. Some people have an issue about XYZ policy. So when I have personally heard these things, my question has always been, when you say some people, mention the number. Because if we are talking about two people talking about something out of a group of 10,000, it just does not matter. The moment that 2 becomes 20 or 200, of course, it does matter, because then it's a voice of the sizable section of the population, and we must sit up and take notice of what the issue is. So talking in terms of abstract doesn't work. So every time we try to drive home that point, that talk in specifics, talk in numbers, that's one significant behavior change that helps. And of course, there are other things which Piyush has spoken about. Because of paucity of time, I wanted to ask this to Dr. Bikramjit also, but let me just check the next question.
Sure.
Tanvi, is there another question?
Yes, there is. So there's a question from Vishal, and he's asked, have you encountered any challenges in aligning data-driven interventions with your overall business strategy?
Oh, I think this is Dr. Bikramjit's question. He has indeed led an intervention internally and even externally also. Let me see which one he chooses to bring up here.
We have just 1 minute. So, given this, we have encountered, and I think the onus is on the practitioner to really navigate through these sorts of complexities. This is not uncommon, right? You're talking about data-driven intervention in people analytics, and prima facie, it may throw up some sort of a contradiction to the business goals and objectives. But it's not something that is insurmountable. Sometimes some initiatives that have to be taken, there could be an apparent significant investment in the short term, which can start impacting the overall balance sheet of the organization. And then these have to be sort of worked out in a very, very through an intimate discussion and with clear mandates that if the investments are not necessarily made, what are the implications, number one? And if those investments are to be made in a judicious way, maybe in installments, then the business outcomes are also not necessarily impacted in any significant way. But the objective and the goal of having those interventions still really remain and prevail, and eventually in the mid to long term, the returns are yielded. So those sorts of contradictions can come into play, but one has to really play it out judiciously in order to manage those from the overall outcome.